And now, your go-to source for year-round fantasy hockey advice, DFS, and betting coverage. This is NHL Fantasy on Ice, presented by Skip, the official food delivery app of the NHL.
Four Nations Fallout and the Great Chase continues. Brought to you by our good friends over at Skip. It's time for another episode of NHL Fantasy on Ice, Week 19 Waiver Wire Edition. Nick Alberg and Jake Hahn with you. What's going on, Jake?
Not too much, Nick. Feeling maybe a little bit of a hangover from Four Nations and all that excitement, but now we can pick it up. Stretch run, fantasy playoffs right around the corner, NHL playoffs right around the corner. So it is an exciting time still to be a hockey fan. And of course, this episode is brought to you by Skip. Skip to the good part and get groceries, meals, and essentials delivered right to your door on Skip.
It is good getting back in rotation here after a 2-week break due to the Four Nations. Pete Jensen's coming up for a look at Week 19, the waiver wire options. Chris Meany will drop by for the On the Money segment brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. You know what's not ordinary? Alex Ovechkin and the Great Chase. He's going to do it this season, Jake.
The Great Chase just feels like it went into a different gear on Sunday, right, with that hat trick. And it was kind of strange, right, that Saturday game where I believe the Caps put up, 8 goals, and Ovi doesn't factor in at all. And then the next day he makes up for it with the hat trick. So I do think there's some angles to play here, Nick. We can get into it maybe a little bit with Means and On the Money, maybe some betting angles here to look for. I've enjoyed playing the Alex Ovechkin live goal when they're up in the third period, and there's that empty net possibility as well. But to your original point, it does feel like it's going to happen this year, right? And who knows? Maybe he throws in another hat trick this week. They got a few home games on the schedule.
That Capitals team is so good. And I honestly think like the Ovechkin chase is overshadowing the potential of Washington winning the Stanley Cup this season. Yeah. They're that good. But it reminds me a lot of Vancouver's run last season. But they got everything. They got the defense. Chychrun's having a great year. They got the goaltending with the two-headed lefty monster. And the guys up front. But this is something that we dreamed about 5 years ago, and it's going to happen. I'm just more curious how it's going to be covered in the days leading up to the actual goal here, Jake.
Well, it sounds like you think it's legit and the Capitals can actually win some playoff games, Nick, and I would agree with that. I feel that way. I've got a little bit of a Caps future as well that I feel pretty good about, at least going into the postseason. So I think it's legit. I mean, we talk about surprise teams. You mentioned Vancouver from last year. Watching the Canucks last year, it kind of felt like, okay, a little bit of it was smoke and mirrors. I wasn't surprised to not see them go on a deep run, but I think the Capitals are absolutely legit. They're so much more than Alex Ovechkin, as we found out. And I'm looking through that Eastern Conference, Nick. To me, it's anybody's ball game on that East side. Like, nobody's really blown me away. I think it's really just been the Washington Capitals, who've probably been the most consistent team in the National Hockey League. Go through all of their games the entire season and try to find me a blowout or a game where they weren't competitive in. And I'll wait. I'll sit here and wait.
Such a juggernaut, and I had a chance to interview last week Spencer Carberry, the Jack Adams favorite on Leafs Morning Take at the Leafs Nation 401, where you could subscribe, and I was just blown away. I could tell within seconds why that team is playing for that coach, and they're doing something really, really special. So is Ovechkin. Needs 13 goals in his final 25 regular season games. I think it's a foregone conclusion. I don't know if you feel the same way, Jake.
Well, I may have felt differently if he didn't do what he did on Sunday, right? True. If we were talking here and he had a goose egg for the weekend and, okay, you're trying to do the math and thinking, he probably needs 1 or 2 big games at some point. Well, he had his big game on Sunday. So now I feel pretty confident that he is going to do it. And look, he's got a target in mind, Nick. And when you've got that target and you're a guy like Ovechkin and you have the surrounding cast now in Washington, which I don't think he's had the past few years, he is going to be in a lot of situations to score, right? We saw him score from that classic OV one-timer, The Office, on the power play. Obviously, he loves the empty net situations as well, so they're going to be looking for him to pad the stats there. I do think, though, when we get closer, Nick, I'm curious your take on this. Would you be okay with the tying goal or the passing goal to Gretzky being an empty netter? I kind of feel like I want it to be a little bit more of a legit goal. I don't mind him to pick up the empty netters now, but when it actually comes down to that big goal, I wouldn't mind seeing it from the classic OV Office myself.
That's exactly it. In a perfect world, Carlson, who's been a long-standing member of the Washington Capitals, to Ovechkin on the power play, top cheese, and there's the record. Everybody fouls onto the ice. Gretzky comes on the ice. I think that'd be really, really cool, but I will add, and again, we'll get to this with Chris Meany and angles to play, like the empty net goals. I think there's going to be a bunch of those over the next 13 here, especially for a Capitals team who just scores and scores and scores and has big-time leads many a times. Four Nations fallout, Jake. There's a lot to gather, a bit of a victory lap for us Canadians here on the podcast. What a game, what a moment, what a tournament. The NHL and the PA should be so happy with the way things played out.
100%. I couldn't agree more with how you just put it there. And yeah, we did go toe to toe, myself and you, against PDJ and producer Bobby. I had a lot of fun recording that episode with you guys last week and previewing the final, which, by the way, we nailed a lot of those picks on that show. So we did well from a gambling standpoint as well. But just in terms of growing the game and the product, I think this was an absolute home run for everybody involved. And it's been a while since we'd seen best on best international hockey. I don't think it could have played out better. Look, the winner of the game, it's an overtime game. It's a coin flip. We all watched that OT, and the U.S. easily could have won that game 3 or 4 times in that overtime. So someone had to win. Ultimately, it was Canada, but those two nations at the moment, in terms of hockey, are as close as it's going to get. The unfortunate side of things, Nick, and if there is a downside to all this, was the injuries that were picked up at Four Nations, right? The physicality, the playoff-style hockey was very conducive to guys getting hurt. So that's the only downside to a tournament that, to me, was just an absolute home run.
But sneaky cool because these guys put their bodies on their line for the country, and I thought that was awesome. We'll get to those momentarily. I did have a question delivered by Skip, just shows you the magnitude of this tournament. Somebody asked me, should I trade Elias Pettersson for Joel Eriksson Ek? And I said, heck yeah. I don't know what's going on with Elias Pettersson, but he was playing under 10 minutes for Sweden in that tournament. He's finished for this season, in my opinion, Jake, fantasy reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's, and I love Joel Eriksson Ek so much. I would look to try to pry something else like Eriksson Ek plus another small piece for a guy like Pettersson, just for where you would have drafted EP40. But I've been out on this file for a long time, Nick. And Four Nations, I know it was a small sample size, only 3 games, and actually Sweden as a team played quite well. I think they got the raw end of the deal, not losing a game in regulation all tournament, and then not getting a chance to play in the final. But EP40 was really a non-factor. And like you mentioned, playing less than 10 minutes, not out there in important even strength situations. That would concern me if I'm a Canucks fan right now, Nick, that, okay, there was this friction in the room and we had to trade this playoff style player in JT Miller, who's out there laying his body on the line, dropping the mitts with a guy like Colton Parayko, which was an absolute mismatch. That's the kind of player you want come playoff time. Watching EP40, it was just more perimeter play and a play that's not going to work come playoff time in the big games.
I think the word you're looking for is passion. And, that guy specifically, wake up, man. You make 11.6 sheets a year, and you think JT Miller leaving would ignite Pettersson. It just hasn't for the Vancouver Canucks. And a lot of alarming comments as well from Rick Tocchet, the head coach, too. But you talked about the injuries. The Tkachuk brothers banged up right now. Shea Theodore goes down early in that tournament. McAvoy's out indefinitely. Boston's in big-time trouble, Jake. And, we do get back. Guys like Quinn Hughes still hurt. Thatcher Demko, same old story for those guys. But just your initial thoughts on all the injuries here, and some guys will to look at, we'll talk about in mere moments here with Pete Jensen too.
Well, I think we have to be a little bit concerned about the Tkachuks. Obviously, we know they took up a lot of oxygen at points in that tournament, especially for the way that Saturday game started between Canada and the U.S. So I think I'm a little more concerned actually about Matt than Brady, just because I think Brady, if you look at the Senators' schedule, they had the Saturday game against Montreal, then multiple days off, didn't play again until Wednesday. So I think it actually made sense for the Senators to just give him an extra day, right, and use that time in the schedule. So we'll see. Maybe he has to miss some more time, but I'm not quite as concerned about the Brady Tkachuk situation. And on Charlie McAvoy, it's murky. It doesn't look great. Are we firing up Mason Lowry? I know we've mentioned him a few times on the show, Nick, but it feels like he's going to get that opportunity on the power play, and he already has been getting some of that opportunity on the power play.
Yeah, definitely, Jake. I think if you're looking for a guy on the blue line right now, Mason Lowry is the guy I would pick, specifically on Boston. We got the news about Hampus Lindholm over the weekend. Sounds like he's done for the season. McAvoy's out indefinitely. The Boston Bruins, I think, in big-time trouble. And a lot of it is due to injury, I would say, too.
Well, and how about some of these players coming back, right? There's some that are obvious you're going to be interested in. It was nice to see that Marchenko isn't going to miss too much more time. I was worried that was going to bleed maybe into the fantasy playoffs. But even an Owen Tippett, Nick, to me, flashed a little bit this weekend. I know we've always debated Tippett. There's been some inconsistency there, but maybe a little bit interest. Logan Cooley as well, Dursey on the back end in Utah. Lots of players coming back that could play a huge factor in your fantasy playoffs.
You're not interested in Evgeny Malkin on Pittsburgh?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what's happening in Pittsburgh, Nick, or what that
do.
roster could look like in a couple of weeks, right? Are they actually going to get the stick of dynamite out, like I think we've talked about? And I look again. Are you going to trade Sid and Malkin and all these guys? I don't think that's going to happen. I think if we see something like that, it might be more of an offseason move for the Pittsburgh Penguins. But there's no doubt they got to be looking towards the future and trying to acquire assets and really salvage this thing, because right now it looks like it's almost time for a full rebuild in Pittsburgh. And we're all wondering, is Crosby going to finish his career there? Is Malkin going to finish his career there? Maybe we get those answers in the coming weeks and months.
We got a little taste of McKinnon and Crosby in the Four Nations. That's all I'll say. To answer your question, Tippett's the guy I would look at. He was getting hot before the Four Nations break and picked up where he left off prior on Saturday. The Michkov, Couturier, and Tippett line was outstanding, and Philadelphia is a very intriguing team. They're like a bubble team, right? They think they still have a shot at the playoffs, and as you mentioned, the trade deadline's 11 days away now. Are they going to be buyers? Are they going to be sellers? A lot of that is up in the air, but some names to look at, I think, from the fantasy radar too: Brock Nelson, Rickard Rakell, Trent Frederick, Braden Shen, Ryan Strome, Scott Lawton, Ryan O'Reilly. Even conversation over the weekend about Seth Jones as well, right?
A couple of those guys you mentioned, too, did play a factor in Four Nations. Obviously, we look at the big guys, but maybe some confidence drawn just from playing a decent role, like a Rickard Rakell playing on Team Sweden. Even a Sam Ersson, we talk about Philly. Nick, Ersson just getting that game. I know it was a meaningless game at the end of the tournament, but he played well against the United States, builds that confidence up a little bit, and Philly likes to defend well and keep those shot totals down. So I actually don't mind him the rest of the year if Philly still thinks they're very much in this conversation.
Okay, Jake, week 19, let's take a look here at the schedule. February 24th to March 2nd, 51 games here in total, 2 on Monday, 12 Tuesday, 3 on Wednesday, 12 on Thursday, 3 on Friday, 13 Saturday, 6 Sunday. The 4-game teams: Boston, Calgary, Carolina, Los Angeles, Minnesota, Nashville, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Winnipeg. And the 2-game teams: Colorado, Ottawa, Seattle, as we bring in Pete Jensen for a look at the Week 19 waiver wire. And I was pumped to see Logan Cooley on the list. Means he's back in action here, Pete, for Utah, right?
Absolutely. And Utah, low-key, is starting to get some of the horses back, right? Gunther came back just before the Four Nations pause. Sean Durzi came back and has an assist and 6 shots on goal in his first 2 games over the weekend since the return to action in the NHL. And then Logan Cooley, a surprise addition on Sunday night, right? We expected he might miss more time when they said he was out indefinitely, but all of a sudden Utah's putting all these pieces together, and you wonder what they might do at the trade deadline just to come into this NHL fold with a bang and maybe follow suit on what Vegas has done in recent years, just being a major player at the deadline. It's going to be interesting to see.
PD, Nick already mentioned Michkov getting that nice line assignment in Philly, and I feel like a lot of people maybe unfairly gave up on him in fantasy, right? He still might be hanging around some waiver wires. Do you think he maybe inserted himself back into the Calder conversation a little bit as well?
I know that Celebrini has played far fewer games than Hudson and Michkov at this point, but you look at the rookie scoring race and it's separated by 2 or 3 points. Michkov, after 1 good game, is right back in not only the top 4 among fantasy rookies, and I'll include Dustin Wolf in that conversation as well. But yeah, just a couple of weeks of this guy, and I think we had somebody on, I think it was Leboff, right, a couple weeks ago, and he was saying, don't count out Michkov in the Calder conversation. All it takes is a couple of weeks, and remember, Celebrini's not making the playoffs anyway, so if Michkov can turn this season around, he could get back in that conversation very quickly. A must-add player in fantasy.
Definitely. And you talk about San Jose. I love teams down the stretch, specifically when fantasy playoffs arrive, that just there's minimal pressure. And San Jose is one of those teams, and I love that you have Tyler Toffoli on this week's list.
I just couldn't believe how low his roster percentage is, like 20, 30% over the Four Nations pause. And then now he's back into the top 6 for San Jose. There will be a lot of garbage time points. I don't see them being a major seller. They already traded Granlund, and by the way, Granlund was a Four Nations stud that should be in everybody's lineups and should be hit on in the props market. I saw him yesterday at UBS Arena, looked really good on a line with Marchment and Jamie Benn, and Dallas has that crazy amount of riches in the forward group, deepest forward group in the league, in my opinion.
Pete, even though every week you tell people to pick up at least one Columbus Blue Jacket, judging by the ownership percentages attached to your article here, doesn't feel like enough people are going out and getting these jackets. You've got 2 on your list, one that's returning from injury. So what's interesting you about these 2 Blue Jackets this week?
Well, one is Kent Johnson, who we've been all over all season. He's been in the top 6 when Marchenko was out, when Chinakhov was out, and Monahan was out. He's just kept it going, 17 points in his past 18 games. But then the really interesting wrinkle, and this is why I really like, so Marchenko came back earlier than expected after the Four Nations break, and then all of a sudden you see a Boone Jenner appearance for his season debut, and he had an assist, a shot on goal, and 4 hits. You know that guy covers all the boxes. He checks them all in fantasy, and he's only 20% rostered. So this is the Boone Jenner endorsement to pick this guy up, and the Jackets look like a playoff team right now, low-key.
Scary. Dean Evason's done a great job there, but they score goals, and I love that from a fantasy perspective. Now, Pete, I always ask you this question. People always looking for blue line help. Who are some guys that can help them out here?
Jackson Lacombe, Anaheim Ducks, that team's been really competitive lately, and don't steer clear from Lucas Dostal either in the crease. He's about 40% rostered and has put forth a really nice quality season. Even when he loses, he gives up 2 or 3 goals. Really impressive play of late and taking a step forward is Anaheim. I like Sean Durzi for kind of like the number 2, the Robin to the Batman of Mikhail Sergachev, and just overall that Utah defensive outlook. Remember when Durzi was out and Marino was out and it was a complete shambles? Now all of a sudden they're kind of lurking in the wild card race. I wonder maybe what you guys think. Do you like the St. Louis Blues to get back in the mix with Binnington? Do you like Utah? I lean Utah, but obviously, Binnington, we didn't even talk about him. I mean, he totally stole the Four Nations tournament. I wonder if he gained some fantasy value from this, too.
I think he did. I mean, he certainly gained some confidence, right, Pete? But he's always been a confident guy. This is a guy that's won a Stanley Cup before that seems to relish these big moments. So I'm not exactly surprised that he stepped up like that. And I mean, St. Louis is going to need him because we need to see somebody get back into that conversation. But I think I'm with you. I'm leaning Utah, especially with some healthy bodies back in this lineup that maybe they can make that push.
It's funny, though, Nick, right? I feel like my recent memory before the Four Nations of Binnington was like, what was that, 7-5 game in San Jose where he was swinging the stick at someone, and then he was swinging the stick at Kadri that one time. I mean, he kind of became a little bit of a hothead, right, in the net and a little erratic. But, I mean, his performance in those big games, whether it was Boston in 2019 in Game 7 of the Cup Final and then those overtime saves against Sweden and U.S., that was as good as it gets, really, man.
Would have been the cherry on top if Jordan Binnington scrapped in the first U.S.-Canada game. We saw 3 fights, and Binnington the 4th would have been outstanding. But, yeah, he was awesome. I just don't know about St. Louis. They're a team that's another middling team. You just wonder, are they going to buy? Are they going to sell? Are they going to stand pat? And that's why Doug Armstrong is one of the best GMs in the league, in my opinion. You just never know where he's sitting and what he's going to do. And it seems like once a year at this time, he makes a trade nobody's thinking about. So we'll see what's in store here for the St. Louis Blues. It's now time for On the Money, brought to you by Bet365. It's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 19 or older. Ontario only. Please play responsibly. If you or someone you know has concerns about gambling, visit connexontario.ca as you bring in Chris Meany. Means, what's going on, man? This great chase is getting more and more interesting, of course, and spearheaded by that Hattie for Ovechkin on Sunday. What's going on?
Yeah, what's happening, fellas? This is just a remarkable story, Ovechkin. You know, to think that he fractured his leg, early December, and what he's doing right now with 29 goals in 41 games, 18% shooting rate. It's the best mark of his career. So, like fine wine, he's getting better with age. But there's a couple specials over at Bet365, minus 155 to break the record this year, plus 125 for no. I'm in the camp of him doing it. I mean, he's got 7 goals in his past 7 games, and they also have a special at Bet365. Which team will he break the record against? Now, that's a little tough to kind of justify and handicap, but there's a couple teams on here like the Ducks 8 games from now at 75-1. The Sharks 10 games from now, 75-1. The Blackhawks are favored there at 12-1. You got the Blue Jackets roughly in around that number as well. There's back-to-back games for the Capitals in April against the Columbus Blue Jackets. They're a team that gives up a whole lot. We love them offensively on this show, but let's be honest, they give up a lot of quality chances. And then how about this, Nick? maybe the final game of the season against Sidney Crosby and the Pittsburgh Penguins. Ooh. That's 9-1 for him to break the record. So there's a couple, teams that are pretty intriguing, interesting. Jake, maybe just take a little flyer on some of those California teams.
You could have a lot of fun with that, right? You could play a couple different angles. You mentioned, going the shorter angle with the Ducks, and okay, he gets really hot over the next couple weeks, maybe another hat trick and he breaks it soon. Or maybe we play the other angle and go, okay, gets cold for a stretch and has to wait to the end of the season, and it's all dramatic. And then there'll be the conversation, right, to see, is it smart to rest him, right? If the Capitals are all locked up. I don't think he's resting unless if that record is still in sight at the end of the season, guys. So you could have a lot of fun, I think, with that. Is there any in-game angles you're looking at? Means like maybe a live angle on a goal, or even just pre-game, the anytime goal price. I think it almost might be worth just blindly playing it every game for Ovi the rest of the way.
Yeah, I think so, right? I mean, even yesterday with the empty net, I think they put him on the right side for a better angle for him to take that shot, right? I mean, they're thinking about all these things. He's never going to leave the ice come power play time. So I think an anytime goal, anytime the Capitals are playing right now, you guys talked about, they're finally getting some respect in the betting market as well, 9-1. Remember, like for the first couple months of the season, we're like, man, this Caps team looks awesome. They have the goaltending, they have all these pieces, but there's still 20-25-1 to win the Stanley Cup. But I'd say an anytime goal, a first or last, right? You can get some pretty good value on a last goal, like 7-1, 8-1, empty net goal for Ovechkin. Nick, we've seen it so many times.
I'm going to get into the shot prop market coming up with Ovechkin. The last 3 games alone had 9 against Edmonton, 4 against Pitt, 4 against Utah. I think we're going to see over 3 religiously moving forward because he is chasing a record. When we've seen Ovechkin chase stuff and the Capitals doing really, really well in the standings, I think they're just going to tee him up in his office means.
Yeah, it's a good call, right? This is a guy that we're used to seeing shoot the puck quite a bit. So I'm with Jake. I don't feel like they're going to rest him. I just feel like, everybody is in on this chase, and why not keep momentum into the playoffs?
Guys, a lot of moving parts. We did talk about it briefly last week. A lot of overs over the weekend. You're going to continue to play that moving forward, means, because that was one thing I looked at off the bat coming back from the Four Nations break. But you would think things will settle at some point in time here.
Yeah, I think so. It's a good call. I saw that as well over the weekend, right? Some sloppiness, right? This wasn't your typical all-star break of 3 or 4 days, right? These guys were on the beach most likely, for 10 to 14 days just chilling, and now they got to get back into the swing of things. So it's something to monitor, keep an eye on. There's only 2 games on Monday, but a lot of games on Tuesday to tackle some of these overs. And then I'd say, Jake, once we get into March, past that trade deadline, that's when you kind of see some of that tight hockey.
Any thoughts on the 2 Monday games? Means they couldn't be more different, the 2 games, right? We've got one of the bigger favorites I think we're going to see all year. The Jets hovering around -500. You could actually get the Sharks at +2.5 for a half-decent price if you think they could just not get the doors blown off them. I mean, I don't mind that angle if Winnipeg kind of sleepwalks through the game a little bit, knowing the opponent. And then we got Vegas and LA, which is a great game out west between 2 teams that could find themselves meeting each other in the first round.
Yeah, that one should be fantastic. I'll start with Winnipeg. I mean, just from early this morning, they moved from -166 to -180 on the puck line. So we'll avoid that. You could take a look at the top line. I mean, Velarde's got the best value for a goal at +155. He's second in high danger goals, just one behind Leon Draisaitl, Mark Scheifele, and Kyle Connor, who was probably a little ticked off that Chris Kreider played over him in that final game. He had 10 shots in his first game for the Jets. You could take that trio to hit the score sheet at +120 over at Bet365. I would lean with the Velarde goal, but how about Cole Perfetti and Nikolai Ehlers, right? This is a good matchup against the Sharks. They played last night. Perfetti's plus money for a point. He has 8 points over a current 6-game point streak, and Ehlers is 2-1 for a goal. He's got goals in back-to-back games, 11 points over his past 10. If you just take Ehlers for a goal and Perfetti for an assist, which 25 of his 36 points have been helpers, that's 7-1. Against a Sharks team that's probably going to give up quite a few chances, and the Jets are pretty strong at home. But Nick, what a matchup. Jake's right. For Vegas and LA, I look at these 2 teams. I see LA, the best team at home, 18-3-2, only 5 losses at home. It's the fewest in the league. And then you look at Vegas, who they're first in Pacific. They're 25-6-4 against the West. They're 15-2-1 inside the division with a +32 goal differential. I like the under. I would lean with Vegas to continue their dominance, against Western Conference teams, especially in the Pacific, but Jake's right. Two very different matchups tonight.
That could be a Petey Jensen three-way special in that game where overtime is needed to decide matters. For the San Jose Winnipeg game, I'm not looking at a side. I'm looking at an over. 5.5, I'd certainly play that number. Even the 6.5, I expect offense in that game. Looking at Tuesday's card as well, Carolina at Montreal. Give me the Canes in regulation coming off that loss to the Toronto Maple Leafs on Saturday. 8 straight wins, by the way, against Montreal for the Carolina Hurricanes. Edmonton at Tampa. It's got to be a get-right game. I think considering over the weekend I hammered Edmonton twice. They lost both times. I expected a response on Sunday. Did not get it. They got to figure this one out. So I like the Edmonton money line, Jake, on Tuesday in Tampa for them.
Yeah, maybe McDavid enjoying himself in the Four Nations celebration a little bit, as he should. The Oilers are going to be just fine. We know that, so they could afford a couple losses, but you don't want to let it go any deeper than that, right? You don't want to get into 3, 4, 5 losses in a row, and then, Vegas it's going to be very competitive for that top spot in the Pacific Division. Actually, a lot of great games on Tuesday means we got the Rangers, Islanders, which no matter where those two teams are in the standings, always a great game with that rivalry and an important game for the Rangers. I think I'm going to be looking to back them as they make their push out of the Four Nations break, and just fading the Pittsburgh Penguins at this point, guys. They look lifeless. I know we were all enamored with what Crosby did at the Four Nations, and maybe there's still some angles to play on Sid, but I have to think he's working at less than 100%, and a Penguins roster that has really no depth with a Crosby that might be a little bit banged up. I don't like their chances to win a lot of games. I'll be looking to Philly on Tuesday night against the Pens means.
Yeah, leaky faucet Penguins, 13 goals in their first 2 games back off the break. They're just atrocious defensively, and they really brought it against the Rangers, I thought, offensively, and they just couldn't keep the puck out of their net. So, Mitchkov's been talked about here on the podcast. It's actually 30-1 to win the Calder, right? Which is a nice little sprinkle. Why not? Celebrini a favorite at -300. Hudson at 3-1. Wolf at 10-1. But Owen Tippett, 2 goals in his return. Mitchkov's got the 5 points in his past 3. Kuzmenko's got points in both games here. We know that he's a streaky player. The biggest thing for him is just confidence and getting ice time. 17 and 18 minutes in his first 2 games. He had a power play goal the other night. A lot has been talked about Utah here against Chicago. Gunther, 6 games since returning to the lineup. He has points in all 6 of them, 9 total, 28 shots over that span. Utah's actually plus 550 to make the playoffs. And I look at some of the teams like Vancouver, Calgary, St. Louis, Utah, what we're going to pick 2 of those 4. I am not buying the Canucks at all. I'm selling all the assets, so not a big believer in their squad. So Utah, just a handful of points behind. Logan Cooley's back, as you guys mentioned. I'd really take a look at him. And then Nick, the Stars. They're just absolutely loaded. I think my first show with you guys a few months ago, we had a listener question about Wyatt Johnson and Jason Robertson, what to do with these 2 guys. Well, they're absolutely cooking. Since the calendar's turned to 2025, they're both inside the top 10 in points. Robertson had the hat trick over the weekend, and he is tied for 4th in points. And you have Matt Duchene, who has 21 points in his past 15 games, playing with Mikael Granlund. I love the Stars' offense.
I think from a future standpoint, Dallas, this could be the time. Hearing Seth Jones in conversations with the Dallas Stars, that could be a potential fit. Maybe Colorado for Jones, but he wants to move and he wants to go to a contender. There's ties to both teams, of course. And, I just think Dallas is a team primed to make that big-time move. I know they brought in Ceci. I know they brought in Granlund, but I think they got at least one more move here with some of the injuries, so maybe it's that. Last thing I wanted to add is like an angle I played over the weekend. I'll continue to back for the next little while. And that's like Four Nations revenge. That's the way I'm phrasing it. Alex DeBrincat, man on fire. A little maybe pissed off he didn't play in this tournament. Tom Wilson, I thought, was great over the weekend. Draisaitl, because of his nation, didn't play in the tournament. Like, he's a guy, obviously, you're going to back all season long. Evan Bouchard, you guys brought up Kyle Connor earlier on. I think that's actually an interesting wrinkle, betting-wise, is to look at guys who are maybe a little annoyed that they didn't play in that tournament means.
Yeah, and Tage Thompson had a couple nice moments against the Rangers. Cole Caulfield scored. A lot of these players, the break was probably nice for them, but, sitting at home and watching and with the Olympics a year away, right? Let's be honest, right? Like, some of these guys feel like they were snubbed. Jason Robertson's one of those guys, so I would say that that's a good angle to take a look at. And 2 guys in particular that I thought were great before the Four Nations and good during, Larkin and Raymond. These are also guys that are inside the top 10 in scoring since Todd McClellan's took over, so don't ignore the Red Wings right now.
Means excellent job. Breaking news is coming in from Bet365, where every nail-biting overtime win, breakaway, pick six, three-point shot, underdog win, buzzer beater, shootout, walk-off, and absolutely every play in between is amazing. From football to basketball and hockey to baseball, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 19 or older, Ontario only. Please play responsibly. If you're someone you know has concerns about gambling, visit connexontario.ca. Pete, anything else you would like to add? The great chase is on, and we'll see what Ovechkin can do this week, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you could still tap into some of those line mates in fantasy or in the props market. There's Protus is back on his line. He's still readily available in shallow leagues. And then Tom Wilson, PLD, and who's the other one? I mean, the second line's looking good. Connor McMichael, right? About available in about half of Yahoo leagues right now. And also wanted to add Patrick Kane, another one left off the U.S. team. He's been hot lately, scored the overtime winner. Look for him to keep it going for Detroit.
Jake, I'm on to something with this. I'm telling you.
I actually like that. It's the combination of the chip on the shoulder and the rest too, right? They got the 2 weeks rest and the chip on the shoulder. I know Meany too. He also even brought up a guy that played in the tournament, but then didn't play in the last game. And Kyle Connor, I think that's a great angle. Like, hey, don't forget about me. And he came out ripping the puck. So I think a lot of angles like that to showcase, hey, I should have been at this tournament. I'm a top player, and it's never too early to start showcasing yourself for the Olympics, right? Everybody's already getting fired up for a year from now. A lot of the players talking about it. So why wait till next year when you could start showcasing this year?
Valid point. I'm also fired up for the latest edition of NHL Unscripted with Adnan Virk and Jason Demers, so make sure you check that out. Coming up on Thursday, Week 19 Mailbag Edition. That's when we'll talk next, boys. Thanks to producer Phil Constantino, for Jay Kahn, Pete Jensen, Chris Meany. I'm Nick Alberga. You've been listening to NHL Fantasy and Ice delivered by Skip. Skip to the good part and get groceries, meals, and essentials delivered right to your door on Skip.